This video is sponsored by DJ the Lazy Gamer, Zach Haji, and Zachary Hayes.
Tough exams and trouble in the mist? What if Zabuza survived? Part 8.
Now wait just one damn minute, boss lady. That ain't fair to my kids, and it definitely ain't fair to me.
No, you wait a minute, Momochi. Now listen here. The Land of Water is in extremely fragile shape right now. You're well aware their last Mizukage was a lunatic, and his military forces were virtually run into the ground. The new Mizukage is very sincerely attempting to improve the country. We can't afford to even risk your cover and new alignment being learned. Look, I know you're protective over your kids.
At Zabuza fixing her with an incredulous look at her straightforwardness, the Slug Princess simply plowed through the rest of her statement, making sure to make it clear she thought out the decision.
And that you know the culture and layout of the Hidden Mist better than anyone, but it's a risk not worth taking. Your students are strong and well-trained, first of all, and second of all, the exams have changed a lot from when you were a kid.
The implication was clear. The brutality his Ginning graduation cost was now a feat of his he took no pride in either. In fairness though, he hadn't been thinking of that. He just wanted to see his students kick ass and take names in person rather than hearing Konohamaru embellish his actions, or Moegi attempting to much more subtly do the same, all while Udon downplayed whatever likely significant contributions he had. Regardless, he concedes. Alright, if you say so. But does that mean they won't have a sensei for the exams? Just as Tsunade had opened her mouth to answer, a voice Zabuza had never heard did so for her. And in came his team's temporary master who introduced himself as Ebisu, causing the Kage to cringe as he did. Well, I guess I'll need to find something to do for the next week. Any missions?
Nothing worth your time while solo, but I know Naruto has been rather mopey since his last. How about you cheer him up?
This wasn't news to him, though he did suspect his superior of lying to him and saying she had absolutely nothing. But admittedly, he was more intrigued with Naruto, Kakashi, and his crew, as when Squad 7 had returned without an Uchiha kicking and screaming, or even quietly prideful in the face of defeat, he'd realized Naruto would likely take the loss rather hard. Seeing as how he'd trained the better part of 2.5 years in preparation for what seemed like the only shot they'd get at Sasuke until the brat made his next move. And he trained hard. Though Zabuza had only seen him for a short while post his return to the Leaf, as he passed him to come into Tsunade's office a few days ago. The stony face he'd put up was easy to see through. He'd also noticed that the little shadow he'd sensed earlier had seemed to find some peace with the knuckle-headed ninja and his pink-haired teammate. He actually couldn't get a good read on Kakashi's replacement Jonin, but could tell the man was no slouch at a glance. A silent nod was the response to his Kage. It was also fairly clear that the day's events were beginning to wane on her, and he had no intention to be a larger thorn in her side than he already had been. Honestly, he didn't get how people like Naruto or Jiraiya were so openly belligerent and casual with Asani, especially when she was stressed. But in fairness, they also seemed to reduce her stress almost as much as they caused it. Yo Shades, bring my team to sing before you all leave tomorrow, he ordered Ebisu as he disappeared from the room without waiting for a response. Ebisu would do his ass, or they'd actually have a real issue. It also meant he'd have to at least show the proficiency to track Zabuza down in the village before he'd be able to leave with his team. For now, Zabuza wanted to head over to the hospital to check on Kakashi, partly because he suspected by now the man was likely ready to roll once again, and partly because he knew the single Sharingan-wielding Jonin had already learned of the second failed Sasuke retrieval and had already formed a new plan of action. His hunch was correct, as he walked into an impromptu Squad 7 meeting once arriving at the hospital and being directed to Kakashi's room, where a mopey-looking Naruto was standing in front of Kakashi's bed along with Sakura and the pale kid he hadn't met yet. Currently, they were mentioning something about Sasuke's maturation being artificially supplemented with drugs and forbidden jutsu possibly. That was when he heard his friend's plan, which was easier said than done.
We'll just have to super accelerate our own growth, though the method may only work for Naruto. In fact, he may even surpass me.
That perked the former missing ninja's ears. Naruto wasn't necessarily far behind them, especially in terms of raw power and untapped potential, but experience and knowledge had always been the kid's single limiting factor. And dare Zabuza say, with some of his influence, the kid had gone a long way to help make up for that, and traveling and training under the Toad Sani with a much stronger foundation to grow from had only bolstered that. And now, his new Kenjutsu skills were another major boon. But Kakashi had also grown a lot over the last 3 years, as did he and most of the Jonin who made up his group of friends/drinking buddies. So of course, that statement was nothing to sneeze at, and probably far easier said than done. I'd like to see that, Cyclops. Mind if I butt in?
Oh, I was counting on it, Mr. Mummy. I planned for him to get stronger than you, too.
By this point, Naruto had steam pouring from his ears at the thought of surpassing two of his most influential mentors, and seemed to be racking his brain over how such a feat would be accomplished when the room door again slid open with a loud greeting from Asuma, who was happy to see Zabuza there as well. Beyond his presence though, the difference between this timeline and in canon lies in Shikamaru not being present at the moment due to the Chunin exams being moved back a single week. Still, Asuma, in an attempt to get the Chunin and single Genin out of the room, offered to buy lunch at the local barbecue restaurant that Choji loved, which worked exceptionally well. Sitting down to talk, the three friends didn't get very far into their conversation before another knock heralded the arrival of Kurenai, who Asuma stopped his news in favor of joining on a walk. Though the suspense would be annoying, this did leave Kakashi and Zabuza time to go over the finer details of the latter's plan, and for Zabuza to give his opinion, leading to some changes with this training we're so familiar with in canon. Meanwhile, two members of the Akatsuki, just having finished their capture of the Two-Tails Jinchuriki, were moving on to their next assignment to procure funds in the Land of Fire. The next day, Naruto was met with Kakashi and Zabuza at Team 7's old training ground, where he excitedly laughed at the nostalgia involved with getting to train with them both again. They then explained their plans for Naruto's new ultimate jutsu, and Naruto is actually surprised that he's already learned two of the most important steps for it separately. A change in chakra form with the mastery of Rasengan, and a change in chakra nature to an element which wasn't even his natural affinity, and his mastery of the water bullet technique taught to him by Zabuza 3 years ago. This meant he simply needed to learn the same elemental mastery with his easier natural affinity, and he'd already have the tools needed for the technique, or the building blocks per se. And we also still get the exposition of shadow clones being able to transfer memories, something Zabuza somewhat scolds Naruto for not using for more recon purposes. Around this time, Yamato arrives to help out as well. So first, Kakashi wanted to give some simple practice in wind chakra manipulation, which she and Zabuza are actually able to do on their own with the leaf splitting practice, and Zabuza in-depthly shows Naruto how to apply the change in nature to the basic chakra blade enhancement technique most swordsmen and samurai could manage already. It was a little harder for Naruto because his chakra coating came out so strong it took time to learn to wield it with the grip and weight difference. However, this would allow him to directly counter Sasuke's Chidori enhanced Kusanagi, as well as greatly enhancing his cutting power.
This is a good sign. Naruto, turns out you'll be learning two ultimate techniques. A shinobi shouldn't rely on only one after all.
This is actually when Ebisu, accompanied by his team, would arrive, and the training would slow while Naruto and Zabuza wished them luck and gave pointers for tests such as this, while also easing some of their fears over the horror stories Zabuza had told them of his birthplace.
Hey, relax. Literally no one but me could have better prepared you for this. You three know all you need to. Now all that's left is to work together and execute.
This shocked Ebisu a decent bit at the quality of teacher Zabuza seemed to be, seeing as the team had almost instantly had a more relaxed and determined air about them, with Konohamaru also being pumped up and declaring he'll be walking away from the mist with a flak jacket, to which Zabuza decided to not tease and undercut his student this time, stating he expected nothing less of all three, though he'd be proud of them for just making it back home when all was said and done. As Team Zabuza departed with his interim sensei, both Naruto and Kakashi would remark a sense of pride they had in Zabuza's development, causing the former missing ninja to feel a bit of embarrassment and order them back to focusing on Naruto's training, if they were going to have him surpass the two Jonin in such a short time. Though admittedly, the use of Kakashi's shadow clone method and Naruto's current level were already speeding their schedule up by a massive amount. By the end of the day, Naruto would already be moving on to the waterfall portion of his training, and I believe considering his greater skill, Kakashi implemented an increase in difficulty for Naruto, allowing for his request of riding the waterfall with Yamato's help, but being strict on the amount of clones Naruto could use to do so, and maintaining it at 10. This would slightly slow down the speed, but it would ensure that Naruto gained a true mastery over the wind nature before they moved on to anything else. Agreeing with this sentiment, Zabuza would also place a stipulation for Naruto to master his water element as well. From his own report of his last battle with Sasuke, it served him well encountering the Uchiha's flames, but a lack of mastery and stamina made them limited. He commissions Naruto to reverse the flow of the waterfall after he gained the ability to split it, to which our hero obviously doesn't shy away despite the mounting challenges. With that though, training for the day ended and Zabuza actually wanted to head home so he could begin thinking of sufficient ways to supplement Sakura and Sai's strength as well, not letting Kakashi continue his bad habit of focusing so much on one student at a time. Arriving back to his apartment though, something seemed off. He'd become incredibly accustomed to feeling himself monitored while in the village, as it was expected of a foreign country taking in a dangerous tool of an enemy nation. But this wasn't Anbu, as they never got this close to a target they weren't protecting. As smooth and nonchalantly as possible, he went about his business as if he didn't notice, equipping the heavy blade on his back, and then turning his head sharply behind him, having torn his bandages so as to grip a hidden kunai in his jacket with his teeth to fling it towards the intruder, who deftly caught it just in time and went to barking at Zabuza to calm himself, and it was a familiar voice.
Ow!
Flattered you remember me, less so at your greeting.
The Mist Ninja responded as he melted out of the shadows with a tense look, likely realizing that catch would have been impossible without his stolen Byakugan.
The hell are you doing here? And how'd you get in the village?
Zabuza interrogated, now beginning to grow incredibly irritated. If Al was found, instantly suspicion would fall on him, and all the goodwill he'd built up over 3 years would vanish overnight.
Answer me, and if I don't like what you say...
Why aren't you going to the exams?
Zabuza paused, and then opened his mouth to answer, only to be cut off as Al made multiple correct deductions while also answering the original inquiry.
Wait, I bet the Hokage got nervous about you returning to the Mist. That makes sense. I warned the Mizukage her plan to lobby for and move the exams to the Mist wouldn't guarantee her a meeting with you.
Meet with me? So that's why the change happened. Well, tell her thanks for screwing me over. All she has to do is ask the boss lady, and I'm sure she'll...
There's no time for that. The 5th Mizukage, Mei Terumi, wants to meet with you about the Kubikuri Bocho immediately. She sent me to track your progress and report back. You need to leave for the Mist now.
If you interrupt me again, I'll be returning that eye of yours to the village for brownie points, along with your head. And why should I even take a risk like that?
Because Kage have a lot of clout when it comes to the exams.
Though it was an innocent and factual statement, Al purposely let it hang as simply as possible, making sure Zabuza filled in the rest of the blanks himself, instead of him possibly threatening the now Leaf Shinobi like last time. And the influence mentioned could in fact decide a lot. The individual test of an exam, the possibility of promotion, or even the incentive certain teams could have on whether or not to show opponents mercy. Regardless, not going could place Konohamaru and the others' lives in danger at worst, or negatively affect the careers of Shinobi at best.
I can't just leave the village, you know.
No, you won't leave the village without permission from your new Kage. We both know you have the skill to get in and out undetected all you like.
Fair, but if I go and get caught, I ain't gonna have a home to return to.
With a sigh, the eye patch sporting Jonin put a hand to his chin in thought while Zabuza looked expectantly. Al's right eye pulsed as he began to look around the room at a slightly higher risk of having his chakra sensed, though he did get an instant update on the current security patterns and formations of the village, and therefore determined the most efficient escape route.
There's a cloak in your closet. Put it on.
What's your plan?
That mask in your desk. Use it as well, and lose the headband. You don't want any affiliation or recognition while you move about.
And with a poof, Al performed a simple transformation jutsu.
You want your place here protected? Fine. I'll do that for you. But in return, for my help, and for the sake of your students, you need to sneak out of this village and travel to the hidden mist.
Zabuza held up his hand to halt the conversation, listing issues with such a plan. Firstly, there were just too many risks of notice that could lead to an instant catastrophe. Unless Al were saying he really was good enough to spend 3 to 4 days in the village unnoticed, to which the Miss Jonin who could claim surviving conflict with Shisui of teleportation smirked smugly. Secondly, without help, he couldn't pull this off in a way that actually benefited Zabuza. He at least needed time to write covert notes about everyone Al would reasonably come in contact with, and some of the instructions he had for Team 7's further training.
Fine. Start writing them now so you can depart sooner, please. And go ahead and disguise yourself.
I'm not changing in front of you.
Zabuza grouched and proceeded to exposit every single curse word he knew, including new ones from the Leaf culture commonly used when severely drunk alongside Asuma and Guy. As he donned his cloak, he nearly grabbed the leaf emblazoned Anbu mask replicated from Haku's he'd begun wearing less and less, but further in the same closet the cloak came from lied a small shrine to Haku, which had one of his old masks and the civilian clothes he'd worn in the Land of Waves. A leaf symbol would be a dead giveaway after all. When he returned, he'd removed his leaf forehead protector with a bit of trepidation, as he'd very much come to cherish it. His hair had also gotten longer, he noticed. All of his teams had, as they trained so hard in combat and survival, they somewhat forgot to cut it sometimes, though it was better for a disguise, he supposed. With his cloak and Kubikiri Bochu equipped, the figure in front of Al, to the uninitiated and unaware of the wave's history, wouldn't instantly peg this as Zabuza Momochi, meaning it'd be somewhat decent cover to get him out of the leaf, at least if he were on his P's and Q's to avoid detection.
Once you reach the homeland, I suggest you take on my persona. You've interacted with me enough to mimic, I'm sure.
With the mask still above his face, Zabuza warned Al that if he got back and his life was any different regardless of what happened with the Mizukage, there would be hell to pay from him. He then handed over a few pages worth of instructions for the performance as the former Mist Ninja the current one would have to pull off. Al in turn just wishes Zabuza a safe journey and good luck in dealing with Miss Terumi. He'd handle this mission flawlessly, of course. And soon, Zabuza was speeding out of the village in a direction where he knew most of the Century Shinobi like the Hyuga or Aburame have no real need to patrol often. The gates, the exact same way Sasuke had escaped detection. Though, he seemed to not be running into any of the village's strongest shinobi who could even sense him when he wanted to hide. Were they all being gathered somewhere? Pouring all of the chakra he could afford to in his movement, nearly half was burnt up to hopefully catch him up to the traveling Genin caravan moving towards the Land of Water. They'd likely be resting at night, meaning he could pass them and get his meeting with the Mizukage over quickly, hopefully. And the next few hours of solitude gave the swordsman a lot of time to think, thankfully. Meanwhile, Ao, while snooping through Zabuza's things and getting into a surprising stash of instant ramen and sake, goes over the notes that he'd left for him. In the wee hours of the night, Naruto continues to work through his total elementary mastery training and challenge posed by Zabuza. He'd actually began choking down the disgusting food bill Sakura made for him in an attempt to last as long as he could and make the training shorter. Wind and water would be under his complete control, the same way Haku could. No, the same way Sasuke could currently with fire and lightning. This means even though this version of Naruto is more advanced than the canon version, this training still takes a little while due to the skill level now being relative and the goals he's trying to reach being so high. And even then, he does have a lot of factors to help him up this steep incline. Kakashi and Yamato can't help but be impressed and a lot more convinced of the latent potential Naruto has always had, but they have to be a lot stricter about making him actually rest, as in canon, he just trained to exhaustion. Here, he's dipping close to overdoing it. Already in the land of water, and with Ebisu as their chaperone, Team Zabuza have finally been allowed to rest for the night before getting all aboard a large boat the next morning, as Ebisu tries to use this time to shove onto them his last-minute teachings. But fairly abruptly, Konohamaru shuts this down, reminding Ebisu of their teacher's advice. He and the others had explicitly stated that they were not to mention Zabuza's real name here. Blowing off the glasses wearing shinobi, the three Genin decide to simply get to bed early, causing Ebisu to wilt at the total loss of opportunity to impress the squad. A faint chuckle could be heard echoing in the distance along with a dull thud and a tree branch shaking a tad as a whoosh went by. Strange. Meanwhile, leaving an Orochimaru hideout somewhere around the land of water, Sasuke revels in earlier having turned on Orochimaru and Kabuto, the way in which he did changing very little, meaning yes, Kabuto is still out there, and likely a little more peeved with Sasuke due to his chomping at the bit in this timeline. Ready to enact the next steps of his plan, the Uchiha Avenger would also soon begin forming the Heavy, still starting with his primary recruit of Suigetsu. Remember, in the original timeline, this and Sasuke's rebellion against the Snake Signing don't really happen until the events of the Hidan and Kakuzu arc, though here, a major change is obviously apparent.
So it was your squad, right? The last ones to battle Master Zabuza?
No, the Leaf Squad 7 defeated Zabuza Momochi and his partner. I do know where Momochi is currently though, but you'll need to pay me back for freeing you if you want to know.
I suppose you have a deal, Sasuke, my man. But we're going to need to make a pit stop. I can't slice anything without a sword.
Once reaching the land of waves, Zabuza rested a bit before turning up the speed so with the cracking of morning's first light, he easily made his way into the hidden mist, using his mastery of the village's signature jutsu and Ao's tip to transform into him to aid him by this point. Heading directly to the Mizukage's tower and prepping himself for the infiltration, Zabuza's dangerous mission had only grown more so. Miraculously, he is quickly allowed to go and meet with Mizukage Terumi, stepping into an office where the person behind the desk seemed to be sitting with the chair turned.
Good morning, Ao.
Lord Mizukage.
How long do you plan to keep up your disguise? I can assure you, my office is quite private.
So she was being direct. With the puff, Zabuza's transformation is undone, though his underlying concealment of his face and any identifiers or affiliations other than the Kubikiri Bocho strapped to his back made Mai roll her eyes as Zabuza addressed her as himself.
Okay, lady, I'm here. But like I told your lackey last time you bothered me about this, you can't have the—
I will not be spoken down to by a filthy traitor. You owe this village and its people a greater debt than you have ever paid in your service to it. And I've been merciful, considering I let you play in the force, like a child, for the last 4 years almost.
So what? I'm supposed to feel guilty or loyal? This is a waste of my time. I'm going, and you better not touch my kids.
With her appeal outright brushed aside, Zabuza had already pissed the Mizukage off. But as she was wont to do with Ao frequently, she ended up mishearing him. The statement of leaving Zabuza's students alone had been perceived as a dig on the woman for her own loneliness and lack of a family or children. The room filled with killing intent, causing Zabuza to go on edge and dive out of the way before he could reach the door, as Mei ended up sealing him in using her lava release to cast molten rock over the exit to the room, closing him inside, in a situation where he already couldn't afford to draw attention to himself. With his hand now on the executioner's blade in the next instant and drawing it and holding it at the Mizukage for his own show of threat and force, he began to release his own killing intent, while Terumi slowly walked from behind her desk and grabs the blade with no trepidation and a dark look on her face, all while she mumbled something about just not meeting the right person yet. Really confusing Zabuza. She'd actually gotten close enough to look up at him, and as she did, simultaneously the now slowly cooling rock in the misty village increased the humidity in the room, making Zabuza begin to sweat as the situation had grown more and more dangerous by the minute and the negotiations had fully broken down.
Shut up or die.
Make me
Zabuza countered fiercely as his sweaty brow caused his max to finally slip off and nearly hit the ground, if not for being caught by Mei. The two stood there tensely with killing intent and steam swirling around the room now, until Terumi suddenly faded, causing Zabuza to relax himself as well, but at a slower rate. And what happened next both confused him more and embarrassed him a lot. Mei, with a faint red blush on her cheeks, tugged down the bandages around his mouth while looking at him curiously, with her face quite close to his, causing the flustered former Mist Ninja to surge back out of surprise and embarrassment as he went about reassembling his bandages the way he liked.
The hell are you doing?
I just never realized you were kind of handsome.
It was Zabuza blushing now, but he thankfully had his bandages and the mask he went to swiping back from Mei to hide it. Clearly there wasn't going to be any kind of fight now, but the woman in front of him was Kunoichi, and to be a Kage was likely a strong one at that. Cautiously, he returned his sword to his back as Mei continued to gush and mumble to herself, seemingly making her new plan on the spot.
Okay, Mr. Momochi, how about we sweeten the deal for the executioner's blade? If money isn't enough, I'm sure there's something else you'd like.
Nothing you've got.
Are you sure?
Ignoring the rather awkward question as it forced him to deal with some rather hard-to-grasp feelings, he countered with his own.
Why do you want it back so badly? Last I heard, you all were done with the blood mist stuff, so I don't see why you want to bring up the past.
Because my dream is to redeem this village. The fourth Mizukage's reign was hell for people like me. But now I, one of the Kekkei Genkai wielders he sought genocide against, am the fifth. That alone shows we aren't the village. At least to the villagers and shinobi who live here, but to those who don't.
A wave of realization slowly washed over Zabuza. Spending more time with Tsunade had really opened his mind to the greater intricacies and subtleties of politics and power.
To those who don't, the 7 ninja swordsmen still represent the blood mist and that way of life.
With a solemn nod, Mei confirmed his suspicions and mentioned having 2 former swordsmen as missing ninja did little to help with that image. Zabuza cursed himself, as he ended up feeling guilty anyway. But as always, he stood firm in his convictions.
Listen, I feel for you, I do. But like I told Al, I still need this. And even when I don't, I already promised it to someone else. Besides, if you let me keep it, eventually you only have 1 former swordsman running around.
Before Mei Terumi could delve further into the conversation, a knock on our office door accompanied by an unknown aide's voice interrupted to inform the Guinean had arrived and that the first test would begin soon.
Thank you, Nami. I'll be ready to oversee the finals by the time of the second test. Please tell Shojiro to be ready.
The Mizukage stated before somewhat awkwardly walking over to the door and using her boil release to melt away the scorching rock on the now singed walls. After a few more 10 seconds of silence, the two naturally came to sit across from each other at the desk. They had more time to talk and to understand one another. Meanwhile, back in the Leaf, Naruto and his senseis have gotten back to their training. By this point, the splitting of Yamato's waterfall would come to Naruto a lot easier than in canon, but Zabuza's challenge of reversing the flow of the waterfall to train in and master his water chakra was proving much harder, causing him to work through the night mostly on that, and he had to return to it the next day, by devoting half of his clones to the task while the next portion went to move on to the final step of the Rasengan completion training with Kakashi and Yamato-sensei, and this is the site that Ao arrived to. Thankfully, he had gone ahead and used Zabuza's notes, though he realized how extensive they were, though most of them were really just for Naruto. With Kakashi, instructions were simple words, tell the truth, meaning he had to assume Kakashi was either dirty or incredibly understanding and really was close with Zabuza. Once he made visual contact with the group, he instantly called out to Kakashi and asked to speak in private. Though confused, Kakashi complied, and walking out of earshot as ordered in Zabuza's notes, Ao simply came clean and explained the situation to the Sharingan wielder, who'd seen through his transformation immediately, though unwillingly. Atake's poker face was impeccable as he seemed to mull over the information before finally sighing and cursing Zabuza's tendency to put himself in terrible situations that only seemed to really grow after he'd spent so much time with Naruto.
Fine, I'll help you with this. I'm sure you realize this means I'll also be keeping my eye on you closely.
Ultimately, Naruto's sensei didn't have the time or availability to worry over Zabuza's business. The two men had established a lot of trust in each other, and Ao's explanation sounded pressing enough as to require hands-on attention. So he personally could have let it slide. Those who abandon their friends and all that. Now with things set to run a lot more smoothly, fake Zabuza, Yamato, and Kakashi move forward in Naruto's training as the training field is packed with even more clones now. After a break, Kakashi orders the clones to split into 3 groups, as some will finish the water chakra training, some will work on the Rasengan completion, and the rest will begin learning the technique Zabuza was going to teach. He had to check that fake Zabuza was able to do so, which Ao confirmed as it was simply an explanation, though his Byakugan eye and the transformation were beginning to deplete his chakra, bringing his attention to a basket of food pills actually. After drowning his taste buds with water due to trying one and confusing his army of clones, he quickly regained his composure and recited the story Zabuza's notes told.
So, over my probation, I was finally allowed to visit the Leaf Archives with Kakashi babysitting me. I was looking for anything I could use to get stronger quickly, kinda like you are now. That first Hokage was a real monster. Did you know he and the second were both good with swords, but the first had a collection of special blades like we use?
Naruto's clones were very confused by what fake Zabuza was implying. He seemed to just be bragging about them and the first having cool big swords. Ao didn't realize Zabuza didn't really intend to give Naruto the history lesson. He understood the kid was a hammer looking for nails.
What I mean is, he had techniques for big swords, not little ones. There's a briefing of the final valley battle against Madara Uchiha, where he spoke of a massive use of the chakra blade enhancement technique. He called it Strong Sword Helmet Crusher.
From what Ao understood, this teenage Genin had a bit of trouble with long-range combat, so this technique was supplemented. After the fairly basic explanation, he watched as the troop of clones unsheathed their swords and began to practice pumping their chakra blades up to extend them for more range. It made sense that this was a technique Zabuza had learned to increase his strength and chakra capacity. The drain of a small blade enhancement was taxing, so when he saw the massive clones casually pumping their coatings to 2 or 3 times the normal size, he too was very impressed, even though it was a fairly simple technique. Just then, as Sakura and Sai finally joined the group, one of the clones decided to ramp it up to the point Ao had to turn away in fear of blinding himself, as that clone poured a ridiculous amount of chakra into the technique, and a massive stream of chakra erupted from the blade and reached high into the air. Simultaneously, the waterfall's flow was finally reversed and sped up to the point of causing the water to explode up and shower over the field. Kakashi and Yamato were therefore distracted as a Naruto clone which had been trying to fuse Rasengan with wind chakra then produced something entirely new, and he and Yamato were forced to jump out of the way as a large shuriken-like Rasengan detonated and destroyed the area and clones around it. Even though this was a great development, something was very wrong, as the rest of the clones went away and left only the real one, who was already manifesting a third Nine-Tails chakra tail. His eyes were blank from exhaustion, as crumbs from the nasty food pills were all over his face and clothes. Not only had he not listened to his senseis, he'd seemed to go on berserk, and the energy enhancers were only fueling him right now. Kakashi uncovers the Sharingan as Yamato begins to try and siphon chakra away. Training was obviously going to have to be slowed down a little bit from now on.
I can see why Zabuza likes this kid.
Meanwhile, back in the Land of Fire, a platoon of Jonin to Chunin ranked shinobi had been sent out to survey the area for the earlier mentioned Akatsuki members. This includes the remnants of Team 10, San Shikamaru. Because Asuma's squad here is down a man, and since he and Raido Namiyashi, his former Genin teammate, and his squad were already planning to operate so close that in canon, that Ino and Choji were with Raido, who they had no real experience with, the decision to simply combine the groups and expand their search radius a little is made by Tsunade, who can't help but shake the bad feeling about the last few days she's had. Back in the Land of Water, the second test was just kicking off, proctored by a rather small Jonin surprising with a large wrapped weapon on his back and accompanied by a pineapple-headed leaf Chunin.
Listen up. The second test is a game of hostages. One member of a team volunteers to be taken hostage by the remaining 2 of a different team. You either win by escaping and getting back to your team, or interrogating your hostage to plan for an ambush on the guys holding your buddy. Any questions? A
random Sand Genin asked how far the interrogation and combat could go. This was a village that used to host death games as Genin graduations after all. Chojuro interjected, clearly having been awaiting a question along these lines. He stressed that the village had changed tremendously since those darker times, and as such, there were mist ambush stationed throughout the misty forest and mountain areas the exams would take place in to ensure nothing went too far as to be permanently damaging. This was a test of skill and judgment to see who deserved to be Chunin rank, not a death match.
Man, that's sure sweet of you. At my first Chunin exams during the explanation of the second test, one of my buddies almost got stabbed. Twice.
Team Zabuza were still keeping their cool, and already thinking of a game plan as per the parameters of the mission as they've been taught. Of course, Konohamaru tries to take the lead and volunteers for the hostage position, but Moegi stops him, reminding that she had to pause, complaining that the humidity of the hidden mist was ruining her hairstyle. She reminds that Udon is most definitely not right for the interrogation position, to which Udon reluctantly agreed. But the harsh truth did give the snot-nosed Genin a brilliant idea. Tapping into the same mischievous prankster energy that brought them together under Naruto's leadership, he declares he should be the hostage and begins to lay out a plan to his friends. In the Mizukage's tower, the discussion between Zabuza and Mate Rumi continued. With the conversation now becoming a bit more relaxed, the two weren't as limited by what they were willing to say due to the growing trust they found in each other, and they began to ask more specific and personal questions.
Well, here's one I'd love to know. Is there anyone special you met?
Well, special how?
Pouting, Mei clarifies that she meant someone precious to Zabuza.
You're not very good at acting oblivious.
Chuckling a bit nervously, Zabuza can't help but earnestly answer the question.
I did. I met some friends, rivals, comrades, students. I even had a son.
Was he the young boy Gozu and Mizu spoke of?
Haku. His mother was from the Yuki clan.
That moment of vulnerability and the subsequent understanding that Zabuza had likely saved the life of what could have been another name with a long list of Yagara and its puppeteers' victims really spoke to Mei and confirmed her impressions of Zabuza. This grants Zabuza enough trust into finally hearing the story of the fourth Mizukage's toppling and the discovery of the genjutsu that had been affecting him. In turn, Mei is given the full story of Zabuza's defection to the Leaf, and therefore learns of his rivalry with Kisame. Meanwhile, as any Chunin exams worth focusing on go, these ones don't go as planned. As Chojuro and Shikamaru, having retired to a relaxation area for proctors, quickly receive a warning that the Anbu is missing operatives in the forest, meaning dangerous foreigners other than the Gini were likely there. Chojuro leaps into action, already having an understanding of where the intruders may be going. Against his better judgment, Shikamaru accompanies him, expecting Lady Tsunade to not be too happy with his not helping out if she were to hear about it. Chojuro is a lot stronger and faster than him, as Shikamaru quickly lost sight of him and had to push himself to catch up, really doubling his speed when he heard the sounds of battle around the corner, and turned it to see that Chojuro had engaged himself against two assailants, only to very quickly be overwhelmed by their teamwork.
Hey, look, Sasuke, that was easy. We've already got one down.
Stay focused. He's getting back up.
However, when he faced Chojuro's reinforcement, he saw the familiar face, and basically brushed Shikamaru off as a non-threat, while Sugetsu, eager to play with his brother's old sword, returned to try to pummel the confidence-lacking Chojuro, who valiantly and surprisingly competently fought him off. With Shikamaru seemingly frozen by a shock like this, I don't think it would take long for Chojuro to be incapacitated, and for Sasuke to call him off so they can move on.
Sasuke, wait a damn second! Naruto and I, we're gonna bring you back kicking and screaming, and then you'll pay for everything you've done.
Let's go.
A few minutes afterwards, just as the conversation between Mei and Zabuza had grown extremely cordial and relaxed, the Mizukage's aide burst in, screaming about urgent news, only to then scream once again at the sight of Momochi Zabuza.
Focus, girl. Who attacked Chojuro?
Nami stated that they didn't know for sure, but that one fit the description of the younger missing Hozuki brother, and the other seemed to be an Uchiha. Like bolts of lightning, the Mizukage, and behind her, Zabuza zoomed out of the tower into the adjacent building, which looked of importance. There was something definitely wrong, as Zabuza noticed there were Anbu guards knocked out around it, confirming to him the village's treasures had been moved there. Entering the building and descending its long stairs into a deep underground chamber, the duo followed the trail to find the founding members of the Hebi, the youngest Hozuki brother, and to Zabuza's dismay, Sasuke Uchiha, and not his brother. It actually saddened him to see the boy fall to this point, while Sasuke seemed confused and angered by his appearance. This ruined his leverage with Sugetsu.
Damn you.
Wielding the Kubukiri Bocho like that can be no one but you, Master Zabuza!
As Mizukage, Mei ordered them to return what they had stolen and surrender or face the full might of the Hidden Mist.
Suigetsu, the swords don't square off our debt. You still owe me. Even now, you'll need my help to get the scroll past these two.
Oh, shut up. I know, alright. Let's just thrash him and go.
You two aren't going anywhere.
Zabuza solemnly grumbled, appearing between the two with his blade ready to cleave them both in half, as Mei had already replicated her trick of using lava style to seal off the opponent's escape. With no real hesitation, Zabuza went for the kill, catching Suigetsu off guard and just missing Sasuke due to the Sharingan, as he simply leaned back as the massive weapon sailed over him once before Zabuza sniffed loudly. Darting his eyes over to Zabuza's, he realized he had already closed him proactively. Was that the Inuzuka's sense enhancement? Worse, he was using the power of his first slice to meld into an even stronger and faster second attack, this one being an overhead strike. Sasuke realized it was a more advanced usage of what Naruto tried against him, but now he could easily get out of the way with time to spare due to the strength absorbed from Orochimaru.
You really are acting like you don't know me, Master? Blades don't work on me.
Zabuza looked down to see Suigetsu's body reforming amongst a puddle that his feet were touching when the unmistakable sound of Chidori rang out in the tiny chamber. He began to writhe from the electricity coursing through him, only for Zabuza to burst into water and the call of Mei's solid fog jutsu to cause the Hebi members to both leap into the air away from the dangerous gas. Only for Zabuza to try and snipe them out of the air with a water dragon bullet that Sasuke countered with his fire dragon bullet. Realizing they were trapped and surrounded by powerful enemies, Sasuke achieved his Kusanagi.
I'm going to focus on cutting us a way out. Can you hold them both off for a few seconds?
Come on, Sasuke. We wouldn't need an escape route if you fought for real.
Suigetsu complained as Sasuke sunk his Chidori-coated blade into the thick chamber wall. Already having come at them in a pincer attack, Mei and Zabuza ran at the walls and made contact, as the battle was on again, with Suigetsu pretty much gunning more so for Zabuza and ignoring Sasuke's orders, thus leaving him to multitask their escape and holding off Hokage, all while dealing with his usual inclination towards not killing those uninvolved with his brother that the character had at this point. With one hand on a sword he couldn't use for real attacks or defense, and the issue of having to be careful how he approached the lava and acid-spewing water shadow, the act of getting them out begins to take much longer than Sasuke was hoping for, making him reconsider his position. Recovering from the surprise of seeing Suigetsu's Hydrification Kekkei Genkai meld so well with the double-handled sword, Zabuza quickly adapted and began to show his junior the gap between them that had only grown while he was locked away in Orochimaru's lab. Zabuza had trained his skills all around to greater and sharper versions of the ones that Suigetsu had seen him use before, but there was something different about his swordplay now. Meanwhile, Suigetsu was wielding his brother's Hiramikare, the only 7 ninja sword he had maybe the second or third greatest affinity possible for. But even that didn't seem to matter, as Zabuza's raw ability had grown to a level that his weapon's ability alone wasn't enough to trump the commonly referred to as boring Executioner's Blade, and the power, skill, and speed it was wielded with. Factoring onto that Zabuza's blade enhancement and access to wind chakra, and he had become a swordsman Suigetsu couldn't help but to admire even more. Every construct he tried was carved through like butter, and he instantly began to run through his options with the other 4 special blades he had sealed in the scroll behind him. But a chilling realization began to dawn with the second coming of the demon.
Master, why do I feel like fighting you with a sword is useless?
Don't call me master, kid. I never taught you a damn thing.
No, that's not true. You taught me how fun it is to slice things. Now let me remind you, master.
The ground around Suigetsu began to produce a massive puddle, as he seemingly spoiled all his chakra to wager on his final attack. What Zabuza assumed was going to be some giant summoning of water. The moment of pause gave him time to check back in on Mei, as he wanted to get a sense of when her reinforcements would arrive, but a sickening feeling followed by the sound of her being blown back heralded the appearance of Sasuke in his curse mark form, allowing Zabuza to feel the magnitude of raw chakra he exuded in that state. He had to recover from his shock, and Suigetsu's attack was ready at the exact moment Mei had slid a few feet from his position and in range of Suigetsu. As the lead swordsman realized, his guess had been majorly off. The younger Hozuki had pumped his arms and blade with water chakra, giving him a giant arm he thrust towards Zabuza to grapple the Kubikiri Pocho away from him, while his other arm would be used to cleave he, Mei, and maybe the wall behind them in half. He noticed the Mizukage forming hand signs for a countermeasure, but whether she had been recovering from a genjutsu or just plain tired from the heavy use of ninjutsu she seemed to fight with, her movements were sluggish. As much as he thought this technique would be useless against Kisame and the Samehada, it was his trump card now.
Strong sword! Helmet crusher!
Both Sasuke and Suigetsu were surprised when the coating of chakra on Kubikiri Pocho seemed to explode out from the blade, pointing at Suigetsu's center of mass. And the next thing they both knew, the Hydrification Kekkei Genkai user had been blown back hard enough to be knocked out and reduced to that strange composite Hydro Man-like form.
You've been getting in my way too much, Momochi.
Zabuza and Mei were then blindsided as Sasuke had copied the silent killing technique and appeared between the two without notice before blasting them into separate walls of the room with a vicious split kick. As they recovered, they realized he had also sheathed his own Kusanagi and currently stood with a black Chidori crackling in his hand as he held a new one.
That's one of the Kiba swords.
I'll need to borrow this, Suigetsu.
From the blade erupted a bolt of black lightning which carved through the chamber walls as if they didn't exist, allowing Sasuke to cut a massive hole in the roof of the building before he quickly scooped up the defeated Hozuki brother and his blade using snakes before fleeing through it, allowing the heavy to successfully complete their detour.
He's already master one of the Kiba swords, and he's already that strong. Kakashi better be training Naruto hard.
Soon after, Mei's reinforcements finally began to converge on the vault. With commotion and confusion, even some of the visiting Jonin from the Leaf and Sand had gotten curious and came to investigate, leaving Mei with much to explain, especially the single missing ninja still in her presence.
There's a lot to talk about, but this man is no criminal. He is Zabuza Momochi, shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village, and a hero of the Hidden Mist.
But that is where we'll be leaving our story off for right now. Hey Plus Ultra fam, I really hope you guys enjoyed this part despite all the delays it's faced. As I tried to get the story just right, this script went through a lot of iterations and scrappings to become what it is currently, and it definitely gives the best foundation to move forward into part 9 and beyond, which will be very, very interesting might I add. Recently I returned to college to begin my senior year, so I'm trying to still find a balance for everything and work on projects where I can. But please keep in mind, seeing the number of subscribers rise is always great motivation and tells me you guys are interested in those future projects. So if you haven't yet or if you've forgotten, please be sure to subscribe and go ahead and hit the bell and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any future uploads. A major shout out to the voice actors in this part, GohanOXG, who very easily does a better Zabuza impression than me. Forenza ASMR, who as always brings a great performance for our female characters, and of course to AceTheWindRider, aka Ranger Rai, who figured out Sugetsu is totally in his vocal range. You know the drill, their links are in the description, and it always helps me out when you guys show them love. We also owe an artist shout out, not only to KobzArts, who also did a really great job on a lot of pieces, some of which you again still haven't seen yet, but also to newcomer on the channel in terms of something he's actually gotten to be in a story right now, IEnniDesign. Once again, links in the description and be sure to check them out and show love. Finally, our patrons get their spotlight for being the ones to truly keep the lights on when I take so much time to produce new content. In Hero tier, Lone Wolf McQuaid, Stefan Consferent, Samuel Viveros, and Arcana of the Heart. In Shinobi tier, Shannon Roberts and Jay Ray. In Z-Warrior tier, Narku and Normandy 1998 and Don. And in Plus Ultra tier, DJ the Lazy Gamer, Zach Haji, and Zachary Hayes. As well as a very special mention of Crimson Manifesto now being a part of the Plus Ultra tier. Sorry about that, Crimson. The patron sponsorship card was recorded a good bit before you edited your pledge, but nonetheless, your support is extremely appreciated. That about does it for this one though. So as always, be sure to take care of yourselves and the world around you. Remember Black Lives Matter, trans rights are human rights, and that I love you. And also as always, be sure to go beyond Plus Ultra. And I'll see you guys next time.